All right, coming back at you. Let's see if I can get that all in the frame. Yeah. Again, we're discussing this wonderful book, short series of articles that became a book, like a pamphlet. You know, less than 10,000 words, but not an insignificant pamphlet. Very significant for discovering the concept of Bonapartism. It's often referred to just as the 18th Brumaire. Brumaire, I didn't mention this earlier, I should have. When the French Revolution happened, they wanted to change all this different stuff about society, including culture, like what the days and months of the year were called. So Brumaire, all the old months referred to gods and goddesses in the Christian or in the pagan calendar names, the names for each month. And the French Revolution wanted to do that too. So Brumaire meant November, essentially. Okay? The 18th Brumaire of this guy, Louis Bonaparte. This ironic name. There is no 18th Brumaire literally of him. There's an 18th Brumaire of his uncle. He's the nephew of the real Napoleon. The real Napoleon. So this is ironic. They called this because it actually refers to the real deal, the actual heroic Napoleon, the great general who won all kinds of crazy battles against all odds and so on. Back in the heroic period. This is now in the farcical period. So this is the farce. It has 3 acts. First period, second period. Marx called this an acts. Like it's a play. It's a comic play in which the most stupid, idiotic person is rising to power. This grotesque mediocrity. This guy who's like not even really related to Napoleon, who's been living in exile, has tried multiple times to take power, and people have been like, are you kidding me? Like, we're not giving this guy power. This guy, just because his name is Napoleon, who gives a shit? So this is the period, and the first part is maybe the condensed tragic part. The workers lead a revolution in Paris. It leads to the dissolution of the July monarchy, and briefly there's a republic with universal suffrage. But quickly the government that's formulated. Imagine like now when there's all these new changes in the government. They're all reactionary. They're all benefiting the ultra wealthy. Okay, so workers rebelled again in this second period, and this led to republic, briefly with universal power, and they were at the head of it was not a monarch, but a dude. But a party, a political party ruling the National Assembly called the Party of Order, all its ministers and stuff. The Party of Order was this is where everything's so strange and everything's not what it seems because it's politics and there's intrigue. Marx is almost describing, like, in a condensed way, like scenarios on like Game of Thrones, or if you've ever watched political shows like Power and so on. Okay, these just little factions, who's ahead, who's behind, who's got a controlling interest, who's sleeping with who, whose mistress is who, all this sort of stuff. Okay, the secret police and the police, and how do they relate to the government and all this. Marx was fascinated by this stuff. So Marx was not simply a determinist about the economy, and whoever had the most money would win, and whoever oppressed the most people would eventually lose, and all this sort of simplistic things that people say he's saying. The Party of Order basically consists of, and this is where things are not what they seem. It's all the people who favor the monarchy, but they're participating in a republic through this party. They're nominally in favor of the system that their whole politics is devoting to destroying and returning to a monarchy. Okay, the Party of Order, but it combines these two rival factions, the Bourbons and the Orleans. And the Bourbons are like the old school Louis XIV line. And the Orleans are associated with Napoleon when he declared himself emperor originally. Okay, they are really not that associated with with Napoleon III. Okay, he's not associated with them, except he does come to be associated with them by here. Okay, now they are both they are strangely Republican, but also monarchist. That's like saying you're skinny and you're fat. Okay, you favor representation and you favor divine rule of the king. You can't. Those are mutually exclusive things. Okay, so they're for republic, but they're also monarchists. And then but then ultimately, what they really are is they are bourgeois. They've become capitalists. And as capitalists, they are on the same team, but they often aren't. Okay, and the Bourbons represent the old landed aristocracy, the people whose money is in land and in their titles and in their deeds and in their name. The Orleans are like Napoleon. They're up jump. They're more into money, finance, and industry. Okay, they're the future of capitalism. All right. And and they do all these weird things that seem like they're giving them more power, but in fact, what they're doing is they're emboldening this dude. They're messing with the government to make it more likely that they'll seem illegitimate and that people will turn to this sort of hero figure, even though he's a joke. Okay, how are they doing this? Well, first they defeat the actual Republicans, the moderate, liberal, progressive Republicans. Okay, not in our sense of republic, but just wanting a representative government. Not like our Republican Party, but like the lowercase republic, meaning there's a parliament, there's a prime minister, there's courts, there's a rule of law, that sort of stuff in Western Europe and America. Okay, republicanism in that sense, not in the sense of George W. Bush and Donald Trump and this sort of thing. So, and on how are they undermining the system? Well, they take away first of all, they defeat those guys, and by defeating them, they use the military against them. And so that's already like this is a slippery slope. If you keep using the military as an instrument for the government, pretty soon the military becomes the government, and you have a dictatorship, and that's what happens. So they use them to suppress the Republicans. They flee into exile. Then it's just a party of order against increasingly parts of the party of order that are going over to Napoleon's cause, because there's all this chaos in the parliament, and he's seen as a source of stability, and because he's just one person, and he's doing all these savvy things like removing the ministry and putting his own people, like his own cabinet ministers, so he has more and more control over the authority of the state and less of it's in the assembly and so on. So that when he does declare the dictatorship, actually the fact that they took away universal male suffrage benefits him. It benefits. They took it away to benefit themselves, but it ends up benefiting him when they are all forced to vote for him to get a new term, and then he declares himself emperor, eliminates them, sends them all into exile, and that's the end of the story with this fucking fool at the top of the government for the next 20 years. He did pretty well in some ways, other ways terribly, but it showed that a simple dictator with the backing of finance. So that's really the conclusion that Marx reaches at the end, and I'm going to point you towards the end in a second. But the conclusion is that because Marx asked this question, how does a grotesque mediocrity play the part of a hero? God, this board looks like it's 50 years old. I've used it 10 times. How does the part of a hero come to be played by a grotesque mediocrity? That's the question. And the conclusion now that Marx derives. His question was, how does the class struggle make so the part of a hero can be played by a, quote, grotesque mediocrity. That is someone who's just ugly and stupid. Not ugly on the outside, but ugly on the inside. He's a selfish prick. Okay? and he's a hack. He's not any good at anything. He's not a great general like his uncle was. Okay, so how can that part be played? That's the question. How does the struggle, how does the class struggle make it so the part of a hero can be played by grotesque mediocrity? And Marx has a pretty clear answer, although he's a long time getting to it. But if I could just summarize it really brutally, there's an alliance of class forces. Okay? So the answer is a pretty durable alliance of classes, of class forces. You have small holding, that is, they have little, like people with a house in the suburbs today, but they were peasants in France. Small holding peasants who are politically, so that's one part of it, who are politically conservative. They want a return to Napoleon, because guess who gave their parents and their grandparents their first taste of owning a little property, of the American dream in France in the 1800s? Napoleon. Napoleon broke up all these large estates and feudalism and gave them, I mean, they worked for it too, but he essentially set aside these small, he created this peasantry that was sort of, had a little bit of taste of property and had risen in the world a little bit because of the developments that Napoleon's government brought about. Okay, so there's smallholding peasants that are nostalgic for the past. Okay, think Napoleon, or even today how Trump says MAGA, make America great again, that A at the end. Okay, nostalgic for the past. So that's one part of it. Part two, as Marx said elsewhere, writing about how these events that took place in this essay called Class Struggles in France. The other part of it, so you have these peasants, and then you have two, finance, bankers. Okay, and the ability, the class of capitalists in charge of money. What we often call today technocrats of money and finance. Okay, and these folks, it became clear as the party of orders, control of the assembly was falling apart, and as Napoleon was kind of making more and more hints and suggestions that he was going to have a coup and use the military, it became clear in the course of that a part of why they were losing power in the assembly was that more and more members of the assembly who used to vote with the party of order, from the banking side of it, the party of order was losing the bankers to Louis Bonaparte. Okay, and that ability to print money and finance through credit and debt, that remains such a modern vehicle of the state. Okay, you think of today like the Fed Reserve Bank. Do you know how much money they are giving at 0% interest loans to all of private capitalism today? It's astonishing, you guys, like trillions and trillions of dollars. It makes the crisis in 2008 when I was finishing graduate school and it was seen as this huge crisis that messed up the economy. It makes that look quaint. They only gave they gave a bailout of less than $1 trillion after the crisis was over. And here they're doing trillions and trillions just in backdoor loans into all those companies. You understand? They get a loan with no interest for billions and billions, trillions of dollars, and then they charge you or me 1-2% interest. They can't lose. They get the profit no matter. Of course, their charge is much more. My mortgage is, I don't know, 4% interest. Your credit card is probably 15%. If you're lucky, it's less. So these are very, very powerful. So we have peasants, bankers, and you have also, interestingly, the third part of this, not to be forgotten, is funny class, but it's the one that Louis Bonaparte, that Napoleon III actually belongs to. He's not really part of the aristocracy. He's not really, obviously, he's not a small peasant. Okay, he's not a banker. What is he a part of? The third part of this alliance is what Marx calls the lumpen proletariat. The criminal underclass. The Mafia. He's a crook, okay? And again, Trump, just to give you this, Trump's ties to the Mafia are well known. His father was in big with them. His main confidant, a dude named, this is on the Trump side, you can look this guy up. There's a great documentary from last year on Stars about Roy Cohn. Roy Cohn, who was a huge mob lawyer, was also Trump's main advisor and mentor when he was younger. He was also a rabid anti-communist and a self-hating gay Jew who died of AIDS but never admitted to it in the midst of the AIDS crisis. Tragic, but monstrous dude, okay? All right, and again, he would mobilize these people because knew they could get paid. It was all just a hustle and a scam. And he himself was like one of them, okay? And he could mobilize them as like gangs, like a mafia gang, like military. They would do his handiwork behind the scenes. They were known by the police, but because they were related to Napoleon a lot, to Bonaparte, to Louis Bonaparte, a lot of them, they were sort of protected by the police. Fascinating fact. So again, just to review, how does a hero how does a grotesquely mediocre person become a hero? It's when you have this alliance of conservative peasants, finance, capital, and mafia like criminal elements. Okay. Hucksters, organized crime, that sort of thing. People doing shady business deals, people doing pyramid schemes, people doing racketeering, people charging you protection money and just because if you don't pay them, they'll mess you up. So the money is to protect you from them, but they make it seem like they're protecting you from someone else. These things that are tried as organized crime in America supposedly, but not really. It's done very selectively. Okay, and again, if you wanted to say, you would say conservative in America today. This would be conservative, suburban whites. Okay, finance capital unchanged, but if you want to think of banks, Chase, B of A, these are the biggest banks in the country, and then hedge funds. Hedge funds are literally they're gambling operations. Hedging is a term in betting, where you bet on both sides of an outcome to make sure you don't. If you win, you don't. And private equity, vulture capitalism, whatever you want to call it, this sort of where the money is, okay? And then mafia-like rule. And under Trump, those people have been empowered, okay? There's much more charlatanism. There's much more corruption. There's outright... Trump himself rules this way, okay? Trump is like you pay... If you want to do business with him, if you want something for your government, you buy a suite of rooms at his hotel in Washington, D.C. His son-in-law, Jared Kushner, used to own a building with this incredible multiple billion-dollar mortgage on it that was bankrupting his family's company on Fifth Avenue in Manhattan. As soon as his father-in-law becomes president, the sovereign wealth fund of Qatar in the Middle East manages to find the money to buy this shitty building from him. I wonder why. Because it's going to put them before the United States government, Treasury, and be given all these favors and money and power by Trump because they did him a favor. Okay? So you see this durable alliance, and we call it the reactionary right. And what should concern you, what should worry you, is that if history's any indication, if it's rhyming here, then the fact is that Trump, and you know this, he's not a big fan of democracy. The you know, I wouldn't say it's a better than 50% chance, but there's an outside chance that he suspends democracy and we get a full-on military dictatorship. I think really the only thing that's preventing it is the fact that he's just too lazy. He doesn't care that much as long as his rating, as long as people are nice to him, his ratings are good. He doesn't have the ambition like even Napoleon the Third. That loser with his little ambition, he doesn't even have that much ambition to overthrow a government. But let's look at the conclusion of this, because it's such brilliant writing. I haven't really done it justice, but where he describes the peasants is really great. Just to tell you how the Bonaparte dynasty, he says, is founded on the nostalgia, the resentment of the peasants, or if you want, the conservative suburban whites who go to church and lead these boring, bland lives and look at the inner city as black and poor and crime infested and so on. Similar dynamic in France at this time. Okay, so there's just this wonderful thing he says to him. He says, and this isn't, I'm in the concluding chapter, part 7. He says, but let us not misunderstand. The Bonaparte dynasty represents not the revolution, but the conservative peasantry. Not the peasant who strikes out beyond the conditions of existence, the small holding, his little, house that he owns in the suburbs and so on, but rather one who wants to consolidate his holding. Not strike out beyond it, like, hey, let's build a public school, let's build a museum, let's bring culture, let's do scientific research. Let's explore, but consolidate it. That make his holding better. Not the country folk who, in alliance with the towns, want to overthrow the old order through their own energies, but on the contrary, those who, in solid seclusion within this old order, want to see themselves and their small holdings saved and favored by the ghosts of the empire. It represents not the enlightenment, but the superstition of the peasant. Okay, that this by just saying the name Napoleon, things will get better. That sort of superstition. Not his judgment, but his prejudice, his bias. Not his future, but his past. Not his Cévennes, a peasant uprising in the mountains in France in the 1700s, but his modern Vendée, a peasant-backed uprising against the French Revolution. The peasants fought for the monarchy. It's a very depressing fact, but you see that they're mystified and they don't have class consciousness, and Marx will say it's about their material conditions, that they're actually so physically separated, they don't work in factories all together, they have less solidarity on a daily basis, so they become more isolated and reactionary as a result. And the same goes with the suburbs today, and how people talk about, on social media, you only see what you want to see. If you're conservative, you only get conservative news. If you're liberal, leftist, socialist like me, you only get socialist news, and there's very little interaction, and people are isolated. Alone, alienated on our phones, alone together on our phones. One other part, let's just read the very end here, just to give you a sense of Marx underestimated this guy. This guy's a fool, obviously, but the government he had, with the help of finance, with the backing of the peasantry, and with his mafia-like cunning for making money out of nothing, out of just giving credit and favors and so on, this guy ruled the country for 20 years and expanded the empire. It ended in defeat and ouster, but he hung on much longer than Marx predicted at the time. Okay, and again, that should worry you when you think about this is possible suspension of democracy, how it's happened so many times before, how fragile it's been in France and Germany in the past. That it could be fragile here as well. It seems pretty damn fragile, if you ask me. Driven by the contradictory demands of the very last paragraph of the whole essay. Driven by the contradictory demands of a situation, and being at the same time like a juggler under the necessity of keeping the public gaze on himself. As Napoleon's successor, by springing constant surprises, that is to say, Under the necessity of arranging a coup d'etat in miniature every day, Bonaparte throws the whole bourgeois economy into confusion. Sound familiar? Violates everything that seems inviolable to the revolution of 1848, makes some tolerant of revolution, makes others lust for it, and produces anarchy in the name of order, while at the same time stripping the entire state machinery of its halo, profaning it, and making it once loathsome and ridiculous. Discrediting the whole enterprise while simultaneously benefiting it and consolidating your power. Like, could you think of a better way of describing what Trump is so good at and how depressing it can be for the rest of us? The cult of the Holy Tunic of Tyr, a Catholic relic allegedly taken from Christ when he was dying, preserved in the cathedral of Marx's native city. He duplicates in Paris the cult of the Napoleonic imperial mantle. He wears the name Napoleon, and we think of him as like a savior, when that's all it is he just has the name. But when the imperial mantle finally falls on the shoulders of Louis Bonaparte, the bronze statue of Napoleon will come crashing down from the top of the Vendôme column. So that great place where it's situated in the Pantheon in Paris, it'll fall because he can't stand the pressure. But Marx underestimated him, and that's what's crazy. And that's what, if you read a recent book on Marxist theory that I've been... Just so you guys know that I'm hard at work here at home. This book, Marx's Lost Theory. Marx's Lost Theory is that he didn't really explore this question of Bonapartism, although he defined it. He didn't explore it as exhaustively as he did other questions like the mechanisms of production and factories and the use of money. He didn't explore it. What's the lost theory of Marx in this book by Mike Davis? The lost theory is Marx's theory of nationalism. So we've been discussing how nationalism can be used to this alliance under the banner of nostalgia for national greatness. You can bring to power a reactionary government that imperils the lives of really everyone on the planet now. The Republican Party is maybe the greatest threat to human civilization that's ever existed. These are some other books I've been reading to help you to prepare myself. Recent book by Marxist philosopher Slavoj Žižek, the Year of Dreaming Dangerously, about the events in the Prague Spring and Occupy Wall Street in 2011. A little dated, but has a nice analysis of this tax 18 Brumaire. And then I've also because we've been we're going to discuss Soviet Union now in the next couple of videos. I've been reading some of Leon Trotsky's writings about what went wrong in the Soviet Union. Okay, and so the period, a reactionary period like this, we call it not a Brumaire, but this other month in Europe, or in the revolutionary calendar, called Thermidor. Thermidor means when a revolution succumbs to its opponents and they impose a counter-revolution. And that's what happened here. And then that's also what happened in Stalinist Russia, which we're about to discuss in the next video. Sorry, these are so long today.